With that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. Today's session is intended to be about 30 minutes for those of you who might have other meetings or things you might need to hop off for. Depending on any questions or anything you guys would prefer to talk about towards the end, might go a little bit longer. So just wanted to start out with that. Of course, as always with all of our webinars, we do record them. They are placed on our website under the resources tab, and more specifically there, it'll be the video hub. If you are registered, which all of you are, if you're here today, you will also get a follow-up email with a copy to the link of the video as well. If you want to go back and rewatch anything or share it with someone else, you always can do that. With that being said, let's get into today's topic. My name is Jessica. For those of you who are new or maybe never been on one of our webinars before, I do handle all of our kind of onboarding in terms of reach when it comes to new clients or just even new staff members for some of our current clients. So if it is a reach question or reach training or anything like that that you are needing, you'll probably see or talk to me a lot, which is totally fine. But today in our first webinar of the year is going to be a reach tips webinar. This is going to be kind of our focus for the year. We're really just going to trim down the amount of webinars we do and focus a lot of these in on the reach tips side of the world. And we have talked about this topic before of entry descriptions. It was probably about 2-3 years ago now. So we thought it was a good time to kind of bring it back up, maybe talk about it, and just kind of make sure everyone is on the same page and answer any questions you guys might have. So that's going to be kind of our focus today. Of course, entry descriptions, today's webinar is going to be for anyone who is a new user all the way up to a seasoned veteran. It's always good to kind of come back in, I think, and look at our basics and just kind of retrain our minds in some ways, because it's always good. There's always more to learn, and that's going to kind of be our focus today. So this is our agenda. We are going to be looking at description basics. So again, kind of taking it back to basics first and talking through that. So if you're new to Reach, of course, this will probably be helpful. If you're not, and you're kind of one of those seasoned veterans, hopefully some of that we talk about there, you remember. And then we're going to get into description alignment. And we're really going to break that into 3 main categories. And these 3 categories, output type, problem, goal, and strategy, are the 3 main reasons we see entries either get marked as needs attention or something along those lines where you guys might have to fix it. So we're going to really talk about aligning your description with those 3 main areas today. We're also going to get into some support documents. So you guys will see some of the documents we have available for you guys. Of course, the PowerPoint slides today will be made available in your follow-up email as well. So definitely those will be available, as well as some of these other documents we're going to talk about. And then lastly, we're going to wrap it up with questions. I also like to leave that time for any examples you guys might have. I can bring up and make up as many Reach examples as I can. However, it's not always as beneficial to you guys as talking through one of your own examples of your work might be. So of course, during that time, if there's something specific that's been bothering you or you want to ask about, we'll make sure to have time for that as well. With that being said, let's get into the description basics. So when it comes to descriptions in Reach, I like to say this is our bread and butter. You know, this is going to be the main part of your entry, whether it is a accomplishment output, whether it is a organizational improvement, or even something all the way down to key events. We're going to focus a lot of our time today on that accomplishment output section, simply because that's where you guys spend a lot of your time. So we're going to really focus in on that. If you're someone who wants more help in either of the other 2 areas of organizational improvements or key events, some of those helpful documents I'll be sharing, we'll kind of go into those. So if you do need more help, feel free to let me know, but the documents go through those as well. So when it comes to our descriptions, we really need to make sure that our descriptions are 1, specific, and 2, I like to say explainable, or, you know, make sure that you get everything into that description that needs to be in there. In that case, descriptions, I have seen great descriptions that are 1 to 2 sentences long. I have seen great descriptions that are maybe 4 to 5 sentences, or, has bullet points, or list and things like that. Everyone usually has their own set style for how they like to write descriptions. So we don't like to put you guys into a standard box and say, this is how you have to do it. There are basics, obviously, we're going to get into here in a second, that we like to say that you start with. But of course, the way you guys write your descriptions makes the most sense for your coalition, for your data. So just always keep that in mind as we're going to kind of go through some of these today. So let's get into it. So we have our lovely data entry form. If you have watched any of our other videos, if you're a Reach user, you probably know that you live, breathe, die by this data entry form, and that's okay. We know that this is a bulk of where you guys are spending your time putting data into the system. So we want to make sure that we talk about our description today in a good way. We want to look at it as something that helps us really fill out the rest of our form that we have here to do. So when it comes to the basics for our description, we like to start out with having these 4 main questions. I like to kind of pose them as questions because I think it makes it easier to write our description. And we got to make sure we answer these 4 in our description. It's okay that some of these might kind of overlap. What happened and what problem goal is being targeted might overlap in some cases, and that's okay. Where did it happen might also overlap into who was involved. That's okay. But it's always important to start off asking yourself these 4 main questions. When it comes to a description, I like to start out with the one of what happened. Obviously, if you're entering data, we have to know what you're entering data for, right? We have to know what happened. So in this case, whether it's a meeting, maybe it is a training you hosted, maybe you are scheduling time to chat with the school board, maybe you guys implement a new policy at a local business. There's tons of different things that you guys have going on, right? And at the same time, we want to make sure that we're recording those and making sure it makes sense. So really making sure we get into that question of what happened, that should be our first goal, right? Making sure we're being descriptive, we're being specific. Again, you could answer that question in 2 words. You could answer it in 1 sentence. It really depends on the answer, what happened. So keep that in mind. The next one I like to kind of carry that into is where did it happen? Location is very important when it comes to your Reach entries and tracking your data. Those of you who are more seasoned veterans probably know this, because if you work in a county-wide coalition, you have different communities within that county, right? And when you're looking at the type of work you're doing, you might be working on a social host ordinance in, North Side, whereas you're working on the same ordinance in South Side. Well, maybe the North Side decides, hey, we're going to pass that ordinance. We think that's good. Awesome. Maybe South Side decides, hey, it's not our time yet. We don't want to do that yet. So we're going to pass. The reason location is so specific is because of that reason. Because as a coalition, you might be working on a social host ordinance, but it's happening in 2 different locations. So we need to make sure we're keeping those separate, because at the end of the day, those equate to 2 separate community changes. Hopefully you guys know that. If not, you might be newer, that's fine. But making sure that we are including where this description or where this, action, this accomplishment is happening is really important. After that, kind of the who was involved and the what problem goal was being targeted is going to round out our description, hopefully. So who was involved might be already included in what happened. If you said had a meeting with the school board to discuss a new training for the youth, obviously that covers what happened. It also includes who was involved, right? It was the school board. So I kind of like to keep that one towards the bottom because most of the time it gets answered in one of the other 2. So definitely If it's not, we need to make sure that we're including that in our description in some way, shape, or form. And then the last one of what problem goal was being targeted or addressed. Of course, this is one of the most important parts of our description because we need to be able to link or align, as you'll see here in a second, our entry to our logic model, right? That is the whole point of tracking data, is to be able to align our entry to our logic model and see where we're making effort, improving, and different things like that, right? So always making sure that if it's not included in my what happened section, I need to make sure that I'm saying what problem goal is being targeted. So we'll get into that here a little bit more in a second. I just want to make sure though that you guys are thinking through these 4 main questions first. Now, with that being said, let's get into the alignment portion. So like I was saying, we like to call it alignment, but basically as the people who review your data, we like to read your description and then check all of the boxes that you selected below and align your entry description with those options you selected below. So that's kind of what we call alignment. And the main things we're looking at are going to be your output type. We're going to look at your problem goal address, so that kind of logic model connection piece. And a lot of times strategy is a big one as well. Depending on the output type, there might be other factors that play into that, that we're looking at and we're aligning things to. But when it comes to the main 3, it's going to be your output type, the problem goal, and your strategy. Now, let's talk about output type a little bit first. You have your 5 different output types, as you guys well know. And with those 5 different output types, a lot of times comes a little bit more information we then have to include in our description. So let's kind of talk through each of our different output types and what some of those additional description pieces we might have to have. When it comes to recording community action outputs, we need to make sure that our community actions are including in our description, what is this new or modified change that this action is working towards? I'm sure some of you guys who are seasoned veterans have gotten that needs attention notice that says, what is this community action working towards? That's usually a big one we tend to see, and that's okay. Sometimes you might get caught up in, writing your description and you just completely forget to check for it, or you might think it is clear as day, whereas your reviewer might not necessarily understand, and that's okay. Sometimes that's just lost in translation. It happens. But of course, always make sure to include what the new or modified change is that this action is working towards. The best way to make sure you have that in your description is to include that word new or modified. Just to let you guys know, as someone who reviews data, when I see that word new or I see the word modified, I instantly kind of hone in on that and I read maybe what else is around that, what is new? What are they working on that's going to be new? Because that lets me know, hey, Calandra is good for recording this as an action, then they're working on a new policy. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're writing your descriptions for community action. And the location piece comes back into play here as well with community actions and changes, like I kind of talked about in my example earlier. They get into location specifics. So making sure that we are double checking for community actions, and here in a second, I'll get into that with community changes. We need to double check that location piece because community actions and changes are very specific to that. So definitely check that as well. With community changes, kind of the same thing as community actions, right? What is the new or modified change that's occurring? If this is a output that you're recording for passing a new school policy, make sure to put in there, hey, we passed a new school policy. If you just say, school policy on vaping implemented at the school, we're not going to know that that's new. Maybe it was modified unless you include those words. So again, kind of coming back to including the word new or modified can be very helpful when it comes to tracking these and aligning them to your output type. Again, you see the location piece here. the location that this change is happening. So again, if it's at a new school, just saying, hey, implemented a new vaping policy at the school. Make sure to include what school is implementing that. Is it South Side school? Is it North Side? Is it, who is it? Is it the middle school? Is it the high school? So making sure that we are being specific in that location piece and that kind of who piece is really important when it comes to our changes. Okay, so those are our first two output types. So when it comes to alignment with output types, those are the first kind of two I wanted to talk about, because you have to make sure some of those descriptions include these pieces. The next output type I want to get into is media. So media is going to be, hopefully where you guys know, if not, you might be new, that's okay, is where the system starts to ask you for more information below. So that data entry form starts to expand for some of these output types, and media is one of those. And when it comes to writing your descriptions for media, we need to make sure that we're including these three things. What was the media covering or targeting? So kind of that's going to go along with what happened, and that's okay. The name of the media source. So was it your Facebook page? Was it the local ABC newspaper? Was it your coalition website? What was the name? What was that media source? Then lastly is the number of impressions. The system, when you select media, does require you to enter the number of impressions below in the kind of information. However, to kind of do that check and balance, do that alignment check, we like to see the number of impressions also represented in your description. It's just helpful for you guys to make sure that your data is correct, because sometimes when you get into the copy and pasting, you might miss something or forget to update a number. So we always like to say, make sure you put in your description the number of impressions that media message received, because it helps us in that kind of checking the system and aligning your entries. Okay, so that is our media. The next area in reach, or the next output type, is resources generated. So resources generated is going to ask us, really going to be two additional things we need in our description. And that's going to be what the resource is. So are we tracking volunteer time? Is this for in-kind? Was it a donation? Just kind of helping clarify that a little bit will help make sure that the person scoring your data is reading it correctly and is aligning it with the correct resource type that you selected. So just kind of making sure that that is clear in your description. And then lastly, who or where is the resource from? So making sure that if this is a cash donation, you're putting who it was from. If it is for volunteer time, just make sure that you're putting at least the number of volunteers. And that kind of stuff can be really helpful in your description, because like I said, the more specific, the more information we have there, the better your scorer can align your entry and check it, and the better your entry will be. All right, I am going to, before I get into the last output type, I see Calandra had a quick question. For the number of impressions for social media, would you count the number of likes and shares, or do you count the number of followers you have? That is a good question. And it honestly depends on your social media type. For instance, I know off the top of my head, Facebook, we like to go with whatever the post reports. So if you have a Facebook page, under your post, you should see, I think it says number reached or number, I think it's number reached, I believe is what it still says. That would be your number of impressions for Facebook. I believe Instagram, I think, does kind of the same thing. They'll tell you the number of people who saw your image or post or picture. And when it comes to things like Snapchat, I know that's a big one that a lot of our clients are starting to use with the youth. When it comes to something like Snapchat, that's going to be more of that, the number of followers you have. A lot of times, if it's something you post on your story, you can see the number of people who saw it, but Again, it disappears after a day. So if you don't look at it in time, you don't necessarily know that number. So it's okay to go with more of that follower count. That's definitely fine. If it is Twitter, I believe they have Twitter analytics as well, so that there should be some kind of breakdown where you can pull up your analytics and see the actual number of people who are viewing your post. If there is another type of media calendar that you're kind of thinking of, that you're wondering about, feel free to let me know. But that is typically what we like to use for those kind of media types. I believe there is also a page in the Reach manual. I want to say it's towards the end in the appendix that kind of walks you through each of those main social media types and kind of where to find that and how to find the impressions. So if you need more help with that or just want like a refresher, definitely check out the manual. And if you need me to send that to you, just let me know. Great question, though. That was a great question. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to kind of pop them in as we're going through. It's totally fine. I'll make sure to keep an eye and we can kind of go through them. So let's get into our last output type then. So let's refocus here. We have our last output type that we're aligning our description to, and that is services provided. And here again, we have just two more things we like to see in your description. First one being who or how many are receiving this service. The who is just kind of important when it comes to reporting for things like DFCME. A lot of times on there, they like to know, hey, are you serving youth? Are you serving adults? So it can be really important sometimes to just include in your description, you know, hey, we provided a training to 23 youth or, you know, 23 teachers or adults. It just helps us kind of distinguish some of that difference and kind of separate those out for your reports. The other main thing with services provided we like to see is how long the service was provided for. So really including something as simple as saying served 23 youth for a 1-hour training. That is totally fine. Obviously, you might add in some more meat and potatoes around that, you know, what happened, what the focus was, things like that. But in terms of, you know, how long the service was provided for and how many received that service, it can be something as easy as that. So with that being said, that kind of rounds out our different output type alignments. Again, nothing too crazy there. It's kind of just getting used to and learning your output types and really knowing what each output type consists of. Because once you feel comfortable with that, you'll feel comfortable writing the descriptions for those and making sure they have what they need to align to the rest of your entry below. So if you do have any questions, like I said, feel free to pop in the chat. But with that, we're going to move into our next type of alignment, and that is going to be problem goal description alignment. So when it comes to aligning your entry to your logic model, this is probably one of the issues we see come up the most when scoring data, and that's okay. A lot of times it's because of one little word missing in the description, or maybe it's two, it depends. But something as simple as seeing a description like this. Let's kind of talk through this example. We had someone write, project coordinator met with the local principal to discuss the next steps for the after-school training provided for staff and teachers. So they had this entry, they recorded it. Hopefully you guys can see it as a community action because they're working towards this. They can also add the word new. So hopefully your minds are kind of thinking through some of those things. But when it comes to the problem goal alignment, the reason we had an issue with this sample description was because it didn't really say what problem or goal was being addressed. They put it under vaping and we didn't quite understand, or tobacco, I'm sorry, they put it under tobacco and we didn't quite understand why. So we had to unfortunately mark it as needs attention and say, please clarify in your description what problem goal this is working towards. And that's okay. You might see that a lot as a new user, as even someone who's a seasoned veteran. I can tell you, we have people that have been using Reach for 10 years and still get tripped up on some things like this. And that's okay. What we had them change or simply add was the following. Project coordinator met with the local principal to discuss the next steps for the after-school vaping education training provided for staff and teachers. So by simply adding the word kind of vaping to our description here, lets us know, all right, this client was correct. They put it under underage tobacco use, and it's a good entry. And then we kind of go about checking the rest of the alignment and the rest of the entry. So again, something really simple when it comes to problem goal alignment can just be one word missing, and that's okay. Sometimes we get in the heat of our data entry and we just assume that you guys, we just assume that maybe our scorer can understand what problem goal we're talking about, right? We've been working on this project. Don't they just know that it's vaping? And that's okay. We understand that there's sometimes just slips, we forget a word, or we just, miss one or two things that we're maybe entering data too fast and forget to change or add, and that's okay. But always, always, always double check your entry. Do like we do an alignment check, come down here and say, hey, I selected underage tobacco use. Does my description say anywhere in it how I'm addressing underage tobacco use? And that a lot of times will help you catch yourself in some of these little mess-ups, and that's okay. So that's kind of our problem goal alignment piece with the description. The last description alignment type we tend to see come up the most is strategy alignment. This is a really big one, and mainly because strategy can be a little difficult sometimes. Sometimes you might have to think through your entry and what you are describing, what actually happened to get to the strategy, and that's okay. And sometimes, again, there might just be one or two words missing from your description that helps clarify that strategy alignment piece. So our sample description we had here was that our coalition met with the local school board to discuss implementing a new program throughout the school district that focused on underage drinking. Great, this is great work they're trying to record here. However, as someone who's reviewing the data, I'm immediately going to say, okay, is this going to be a providing information program, or is this going to be a training program? Or is this going to be a support program? There's there's 7 different strategies here. So it's just missing that little bit of extra information in our description for me to clearly feel comfortable with a strategy selection here. So what we saw then get changed in the description was one simple word. They simply met with the local school board to discuss implementing the new educational program throughout the school district focused on underage drinking. So definitely adding the word educational lets me know, okay, providing information here is the way to go. If it was a new training program that included how to say no to drugs, or something crazy like that, right? How to say no to party, where they're actively training or giving the youth a new skill, we might go with something different, like enhancing skills here, right? If it was more of that providing support piece, again, we would change our strategy then to providing support. So sometimes just that one simple word that we might need to add or include can be really helpful to make our entry more specific, more aligning to what we're selecting then below within our entry. So always double check your alignment. Again, these were the 3 main alignment pieces we tend to see come up the most with your accomplishments and outputs. It's going to be that output type, the problem goal, and the strategy. So let's get into kind of our last part, and then we'll open the floor for any questions or examples you guys might want to talk about. The last thing I want to talk about today is support documents. Here at ECS, we have anything and everything you guys might need. And if you need something, we tend to create it. So if there's ever anything that you have questions on that you're like, oh, what about this? Ask us if we have information on it, because either we do or we'll create something for you to give to you that does. So always ask us. That's what we're here for. We want to help. We want to make sure reach is as easy as possible for you guys. And the one or the two supporting documents I want to talk about today is this first one, which is our guide to acceptable reach descriptions. So this really basically goes through everything I pulled out today and put into this PowerPoint. It's just in a simple document form. And the nice thing about this document is that it actually includes a section on organizational improvements and key events as well. So if that's something you want to know more about, this document is great for that. The other document that I don't have pictured here is our reach manual. If you do not have it, if you need help finding something in it, always feel free to ask us. That's what we're here for. But that manual has anything and everything that we could think of that you guys might need for reach in it. And if there is something we missed, because we're not perfect, let us know. Like I said, we like to create these types of different guides and documents for you guys to help you get better. That's what we're here for. So feel free to let us know if there's something that you have questions on, or you just want more information or a guide or something to help you that you can print out and have hanging next to your computer. And lastly, our next scheduled webinar is going to be April 13th, so about a month from now. And that topic is going to be community actions. So we're going to really focus in on community actions. We're going to talk about some examples, what makes a good community action, and answer any questions you guys might have on that time. So of course, feel free to register for that on our website under events. Under events, you can find the retreat stuff as well. And with that, I do not see any questions coming in the chat, and I think a couple people are popping off. So we'll wrap up today's session with that. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.